Welcome to another episode of The More You Know. Hope everyone had an amazing Thanksgiving. I know that I actually traveled home back to Michigan for Thanksgiving. So the week of Thanksgiving, it was kind of hectic. So I didn't have time to record a podcast. But this week, we are back at it again. And today I'm joined with Jonathan Adley. Jonathan, can you give us a brief introduction?
Sure. My name is Hassan Adli. I am the founder and the co-CEO of Joyful Gifts, a gifting platform that basically automates gifting for you. I also have a couple of deep background in clinical pharmacy and supply chain. I have an MBA, so there's lots to go into.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're very, very educated. Can you tell me more about your education, as in your doctorate in clinical pharmacy and your MBA?
Sure. I'm an immigrant. I came here while I was in high school. I came in the latter half of 10th grade. And then as an immigrant, you really don't understand the system. So if you are doing relatively well in school, usually your family will try to steer you into being a doctor or a pharmacist or a lawyer, one of these stable careers. And they wanted me to be a doctor, but I tried to avoid being a doctor. So pharmacy was quite the compromise, where it's a doctorate and it's in healthcare, but not 12 years of school. And then I did relatively well in school in pharmacy, and after I finished, I had the opportunity to pursue postdoctoral training, a residency. So I did that. After that, I worked in a hospital, taking care of ICU and emergency room patients for good 5 years. And then at this point, I there was the opportunity appeared where I can do an MBA, and it would be completely covered for free by my employer as well as the school.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so these opportunities don't come that often. So I decided to take advantage. And you can say that while doing my MBA, I truly found my passion and things clicked. And I really enjoyed the process of thinking about um, coming up with a business from the ground up, creating something that did not exist before, providing jobs for talented people, bringing groups of people together to achieve something that didn't exist prior to you. So while I was in school doing my MBA, um, I uh, I had a classmate that was doing it as well, and then we met across someone who had um, a PhD in like computer science, and we decided to do a company where we work with schools, mainly private schools, because of the funding, to do in-school, in-person coding classes, and we call the company Coderific. So it was doing, very well for a new company up until COVID hit, and all the schools had to close, and obviously our contracts got canceled, which is quite a hit for a baby company that just was establishing itself. So it kind of didn't go anywhere after that. Um, I finished my MBA, and then in the process of working in Coderific, I picked up coding and I started, learning more and more about it. And then a year out, I was pretty, I was pretty comfortable calling myself a self-taught developer, a software developer. And that's when I found my second company, Joyful Gifts, which is, when I was doing Coderific and doing my school and working, um, life was very busy, and it was extremely difficult to stop everything and shop for gifts. So that was to solve my own problem, which I had back then, and it turns out, I'm not the only person who had this problem. It was quite a few individuals as well.
That is that sounds like a boatload of work. Do you do much with clinical pharmacy to this day?
Yeah, I mean, that's if you have to pick a topic, when I would say like I'm the most one of the top 100, I guess, or the top 1,000. It would be clinical pharmacy. I don't. My day-to-day job is not clinical pharmacy, but I'm not so much removed from it that the knowledge does not exist. I I do a lot of what I do in my day job, in addition to Joyful Gifts, is has to do with pharmacy and pharmacy supply chain, and how to do drugs, acquire drugs, and how everything fits together. So that knowledge is still it still has to stay there for me to do what I do.
Gotcha. And it sounds like you've been in a lot of schooling. How many years has it been since you've been in school?
So I graduated from the PharmD program in 2012. So that's 8 years now. Um, and I graduated from the MBA program a year and a half ago. So yeah, 20 May 2019.
What really inspired you to take all of these courses and advance yourself in so much schooling?
Yeah, I mean, so for the pharmacy thing, it was really my parents. Like, you come here as an immigrant, and there's really the things that you can do, the infrastructure, your family infrastructure, or the privilege that you are allowed, doesn't give you a lot of chances if you don't have a very good education. So things kind of fell this way. It was the pharmacy school, and when I was there, I did relatively well, and I enjoyed it. And then for the MBA, like I said, it was just an opportunity that came. Um, I did my job well, and there was a chance to advance. So um, it kind of again fell into place. But yeah, I mean, I see school as something that there it, it could be. It's not really where most of the learning happen. That's real life stuff where you work, you interact with people, you build relationships. But it's a great way to build credentials. Where if you don't have a lot of family wealth, or you don't have a lot of connections, then you can make up for it by having these credentials.
Gotcha. Yeah, I totally get that. I totally because I think that college is all good and all, but it's not really beneficial if you can't apply it. Because I found out when I was in college, when I got my first internship, and I was able to apply what I was learning inside of school in the real world environment. I was able to understand it a lot more.
Yeah, and it's not as much as how much you know. It's more if you can convince those around you that you know it and they should apply it. So, and college is not about that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think right now in this time of in this era of where we're in with the pandemic right now, everyone's and a lot of people are out of work. I think that right now is the best time that we can self-develop ourselves. And you said that you are a self-taught programmer.
Yes.
How did you learn?
Yeah, so after Coderific kind of ended because of the corona, I went from like working close to 70 hours a week to just doing like the normal stuff, like the day job that I do, which is probably like 35 hours a week, but it's flexible. And that gave me a lot of time, and I didn't like I needed something to do. So I stumbled into a Harvard course that is free, anybody can take, and it's called CS50. And then I decided to enroll in it, thinking like it's not I'm not gonna lose anything. It's probably not that it's not that hard. It's an introduction to computer science, so it shouldn't be that complicated. And when I enrolled, it was extremely difficult and by far like the hardest academic class I ever took. And I took organic chemistry, I took physics, I took like some difficult classes in there, and it was not even close. It was much more difficult, and that kind of like checked the box in my brain that this is something that I should pursue, because if it's that difficult and there's that many people who want to do it, then there's something worth it at the end of the tunnel. And I took that course. I took another course, and within 6 months, things kind of like one course led to another, and by like 6 months in, I felt very comfortable building whatever I feel like building using software.
Were these all free courses or?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I had to buy a book for like $20 at some point, but that's it. The whole journey that I learned from like A to Z basically cost under $50.
I think that's like the most fascinating thing about today's modern day is that like even if like I know that during the pandemic colleges are not as enticing to students as they were before. I saw a article on LinkedIn where they were talking about freshman enrollment rates went down this year, which I see is feasible, but in reality like you can self teach yourself coding and like other skills that can I want to say that can substitute a
Yeah, I mean,
college
when it
degree
comes
in
to
a way.
learning, we are blessed. We are like the greatest generation ever that you can learn anything about any topic over the internet for free. You can literally there's nothing medicine, pharmacy, chemistry, biology, anything. It's all out there and it's mostly free. But the challenge is the credentialing. And again, that comes into point if you're like a minority or someone who does not come from a privilege. Um, you need to be above the average, so to speak, because there's no reason that someone would pick you, and this is just the reality. Unfortunately, someone would pick you for a job over, someone who has well connected or has some kind of privilege or has some kind of connection to that job. So that's really the importance of college, which is to stand out from the crowd, basically. But the learning itself can happen very easily outside of college.
Yeah, yeah, I, de- I definitely get that. Were there for so in order to really understand a coding language, really, because when I took my first introduction to computer science, we learned Python, and learning Python through like tutorials and videos were very beneficial. But the most beneficial part that I learned when learning a new software was to doing mini projects. How did you find mini projects or like uh mini projects to do to help you implement what you've learned? Because for me, I found it really hard to find like uh projects online because I think because like most of the projects that I got that I can find are just mainly from the ones that I did in school.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I tell anybody who says, I want to learn programming. The first thing I ask is like, why? It's like learning how to read and write. So imagine, you have not much to say to the world, and then you learn how to read and write. That would be useful, but not as useful as if you, for example, have lots of insight and you like to talk about philosophy, and then so you decide to read and write because that's something that you're going to write about or read about. So in the same way, I think me learning to code as an older person, I was 30 years old when I started learning. I'm 31 now. Um, I have already came across so many things that I want to do, and I want to make a difference. I want to make a project on it, but I did not have the skill to do it. So, for example, there was a nonprofit that I sit on the board on, and the nonprofit was doing a lot of good work in the real world, but it was hard to translate the real work on the ground to online and use that goodwill, so to speak, and the infrastructure that they built to to multiply it by putting it online. So that was one of my first projects. I was also at some point I ended up doing like a podcast for 3 years. It's a cultural slash historical podcast. And again, I didn't know anything about coding or programming or whatever, so it was just sitting on a WordPress website, and like it was very hard to access and for people to know it actually exists. Once I learned, that was one of my first projects. And then along the way, there was so many things that I wanted to do, and it ended up more or less me not able to do it because I was still learning. So, for example, the idea of Coderific, which is to teach kids how to code, the right way, because there's lots of, I mean, I can, this is a whole different podcast, but there's all kind of things online that it shouldn't be. um, that also could be done a lot more clever and a lot more um, naturally if you know how to code. um, and I tried, like, one of my first projects is trying to do something like that, but again, that was very early on. So like, it didn't go nowhere because it was just basically me just learned enough trying to do something that is difficult to execute on.
Gotcha, gotcha. And then yeah, moving on to your first business that you started up, Coderific. How did you really start Coderific, and like, was it just you running it, or did you have other partners with it?
No, so I was like the business person of it because I was doing it in the MBA, not the tech person. And the reason it came to be, we were basically sitting in an MBA class and we were studying the highest markets that were growing at the time. And after, after you do the research and you do the analysis, we came up with that coding boot camps. That was like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and they were growing like 900% per year. And we were supposed to evaluate if it's a viable market or if it's going to continue to grow this way, and so on. MBA stuff. And then obviously the biggest weakness when we analyzed it is that um, the the demand side for developers or computer scientists or whatever you want to call them is not infinite. At some point, if you train enough um, boot campers, coding boot campers, then there's going to be too many people for too little jobs. It could happen 5 years from now. It could happen 10 years from now. It really depends on how much innovation the society as overall is doing and how much jobs are being created. So that was the weakness of that market. And I had a classmate, and then that sparked a discussion. I was like, okay, so how can you solve that weakness? And obviously, if you do it with kids, then you don't have to worry about the demand side, because kids, they don't need a job after you teach them. You're going to teach them and they're going to grow up. They may be doctors, they may be pharmacists, they may be engineers. um, the truth of the matter is, if they learn how to code, then they're going to be so much better at their jobs, because now they have that skill set that is equivalent to, reading and writing 200 years ago. You could go in
Yeah.
a factory and, like, you'll be okay working in a factory, but if you know how to read or write, that would elevate you so much higher. um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's it. But obviously, we were not tech people. Both of us, like, were MBA folks. So we had to recruit a person who would be able to do the curriculum, who would be able to evaluate the hiring of the instructors, and so on. So yeah, we ended up recruiting a tech person, and we ran with it. It was obviously, I'm not in California or any fancy place like that. I'm actually located in Delaware, but we ended up raising a small seed round, and then we opened up a location. And like I said, it was doing very well until COVID kind of killed things. So
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. I think coding in general is very beneficial to anyone, because it's not only the fact that you know how to write code yourself, but it's the way that like coding makes you think. It makes you break down a lot of problems into smaller pieces. I mean, I know for me, when I did coding projects, is that I broke it down into little segments. I built every segment on its own, tested them out, and see if there was ways to integrate them together. But in the COVID era, I feel like there's a lot more entrepreneurs coming out into light. What were some processes that you did in the beginning to get your businesses established?
yeah, so I mean, it's by far the hardest thing anybody will do. You're literally like fighting everybody's what they're used to. Especially, like, it's one thing if you decide to go and sell shoes, right? Everybody is used to buying shoes. But if you do something that is not there before, then it becomes quite difficult to not only convince customers, which if you have a good problem, they would come, but also to convince people to take a chance on you and work with you. To convince, like, one of the funny things when we did Coderific is we were trying to rent a place, and we had a hard time having a landlord lending to us, because he would ask us, what business are you guys in? And these guys are like in their 50s and 60s, and we are like, oh, we're going to teach kids how to code. And it's like, to them, that makes no sense. And they're like, oh, you're going to, it's not going to work out. And then he would not give you a lease. um, so that it's extremely difficult, and again, you're working with limited budget, and you cannot turn things off. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's your business. It's your idea. Especially if you raise, it's not just your effort; it's other people's effort, so to speak. So you're always on, which is quite exhausting.
Mm. How so say like someone wanted to start a business today, um, and they have a wild idea and and like they wanted to act on it. What are some tips that you could give them today of like what they should do for like how like is there anything that they need to file under the government? Is there anything that they need to do or make sure of before they even start like building up?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is to them to think about why are they doing this. To be honest, if someone is looking at just making a consistent, comfortable salary or income, um, I don't know if starting something that is completely brand new that no one have ever seen before, or not very common in the world, is the best way to do it. The best way to do that is to get to be like super expert in a super niche topic that not much people know about and people are willing to pay you a lot of money for. So that's if your goal is to make comfortable money. If your goal is to be free, or like to be financially independent, or to set your own hours and so stuff like that, then the way to do it is you don't want to solve too big of a problem, because you will end up needing to raise money, and if you do that, that takes a lot of your freedom, because you have people to answer to, if not formally, then at least informally and just by normal human decency. You don't want to take people money and just not show up to work, basically. um, and then if your goal is to find the next Facebook, for example, then the way to do that is basically to network and get in people who are like-minded, because these things, it's not a one-man effort. It usually takes a group of like-minded people who are well connected to influential circles, so to speak.
You mentioned networking. Networking is a very very powerful tool that everyone has today, and honestly it's kind of what a lot of people say is like, okay, you can have a 4.0 GPA and go to the best college, but you don't know anyone, and there's a possibility that that person can lose out to someone who has a network of connections. How do you network really, and what are some tips that you can give to people so they can network on either LinkedIn or anywhere better?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, this is probably gonna be my my least favorite topic. I hate networking. Like, by nature, I'm an introvert. But what I found useful is basically to be nice and kind. When you're starting out, uh, it's very hard because you just started, right? Like, no one really cares who you are and what you do. So the way that you network is to see your classmates, and you just be nice and kind and as helpful as possible. So that way, if they end up being in a good place, they can pull you along. Um, they at least you would have the reputation of being a reliable person. Um, and there's so many examples of people who I worked with college, and they were extremely unreliable when I was there. And there's no way like I would recommend them for like a job or something. On the other hand, there was people who were, diligent, reliable, did what they're supposed to do, and these people, I'll go out of my way to help them if the opportunity arose. And as you grow in your career, I don't really believe. Maybe I'm wrong, okay, but I don't really believe in the whole LinkedIn influencer, Twitter influencer personas. I think if you know what you're talking about and you consistently have good insights, then the right people would eventually, want to talk to you, or want to listen to you. And in the same time, you should be open, no matter how good you get at what you do. You should be open to what other people have to say. And when they do something that makes sense, you should reach out to them and be like, "Hey, that made a lot of sense." And appreciate their insight, so to speak, even if like they're not famous. If like the famous people don't care if you tell them good job, but the kids are like someone who's just graduated from college and did like a wonderful analysis and like a stock or something like that. You, a random stranger, saying to them good job means the world to them. So that's what I would say was network. Just be consistently kind and a nice person, and eventually doors would open to you. Um, and networking without expertise is grift, and expertise without a network is just working for like big corporate. And if you want to be like a founder or someone who can find their own thing, you want to combine both of them. You want to have expertise and you want to have a network.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely like the way that you broke down how to network because I think a lot of people overcomplicate things when it comes to networking. I think a lot of people think that when you network, it's it's just talking about work or something.
Or I mean, the worst is like when you come and you talk about your achievement. I mean, that's great, but I mean, usually if you just met the person, then the very least you should have something interesting to say or talk about other than what you have achieved, because and that would come later naturally.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that it's a short term thing, but the way that you described it, it seems like more of a long term thing. Where if you go by the style that you went with and you're consistent with it, then you'll slowly build that connection up gradually. When I think that people today only want like really quick results. So say someone's on LinkedIn and they're trying to get a job and they found out that one of their person they connected with a recruiter or something and they try to connect with them through a LinkedIn message and expect them to connect in like a day,
Yeah,
which to be honest I personally have tried that before, doesn't really work out, but I do like your approach to that.
yeah. Like I said, expertise. I'm not expertise, but at least competence comes before networking, because I see that's the biggest mistake that people do when they would have, like, right now I would never. I'm not looking forward to like working as a developer, for example, right? But let's say a year from now, if I decide to, then I'm already building that network. I'm already like reaching out to people who are just learning. I'm already, if someone is learning and like bought a great tutorial on how to do X, Y, and Z, and I used it, then I would reach out to them and be like, hey, by the way, I love your tutorial. This is how I used it in my project. So that way, I I build that bridge basically, and I'm not looking for anything back because I may never apply for a job as a developer, and I don't think I would. But that bridge is there, and if that person needs help or something in the future, then they can come to me, and if I need some help with something in the future, then I can go to them.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely like that. Moving on to the final topic, let's talk about your newest venture. How did this come to fruition, and what steps, like what from your previous business helped you build up your current business?
Yeah, so my previous adventure, so to speak, even so, it taught me a very good lesson that things could change very quickly, and you should never sacrifice the now and then for some reward in the future. At least you should be balanced about it. The whole thing was very stressful and it was a lot of work. Um, and by the end of it, especially when the COVID thing came and the contracts got canceled, and I had to return the investors their money, it was um, it was quite it burned me out, and I wanted to do something that is joyful and fun and use my skills as well. So yeah, I was sitting back and I'd be like, what was things that I could have done better? over the last year, and I looked at when I was busy and like doing a lot of stuff, I was like, I have all those people in my life who help me, and I need to appreciate and express my love to them. But birthdays, forget about it. Like I would never remember birthdays. Mother's Day. Uh, I literally remembered the day of that it's Mother's Day, and I ended up paying like a lot of money for like really bad flowers just to say I did something. um, and I had this consistent problem of like I want to appreciate the people around me, and I want to say, hey, by the way, you mean a lot to me in my life. But I never had the mental capacity, um, sometimes even the time to do so in a good way. Um, so that's basically how the idea came, and I didn't have a lot of expectation for it. It was just like I said, it's something that's joyful and fun. It was just me and my wife working on it. My wife taking care of the logistics and all, um, the gifts and the shopping and all that, while I'm taking care of the software stuff. And we ended up doing it for fun. It was actually ended up solving problems for people who are like me, and it's basically we only launched a month ago, but
Two
it's
months ago?
in November basically. We only
Oh
launched
wow.
in November 11, but I can say that there's there's as many customers there, um, as in the 1 month as we had with Scuderific for the first 3 months.
That's
Um,
insane.
and I mean, it solves a problem. That's
Yeah.
really yeah. It's like it's a problem. Some people have a lot of time and they can shop and they can pick the perfect gifts every time. But some people are like me who are like they don't know how to shop. They don't like shopping, and they end up spending like a lot of time on picking gifts, and they end up buying something that's expensive and doesn't really make sense. Um, so that's that. It's the future is yet to be determined, but I'm very excited, especially that this is something that we doing it with an ethical point of view too, where we work with nonprofits where when someone like signs up, we we have a kid in a developing country, and then we end up giving a gift to that kid at least once a year. um, so it's a lot of fun. Even if it, like, let's say it doesn't become like $1 million business or whatever, and it's only like 100 customers forever and ever and ever, then that would work very well for us. So
Is it just you and your wife doing this, or do you
yeah,
have other investors, or do you plan on getting other investors in this?
no, I have no plans. Like I said, to me, I'm optimizing for being free and basically doing good in the world, and being waking up in the morning, looking forward to what I'm going to do for the rest of the day. So we're keeping it small for now. If things got crazy, then things got crazy, and we'll deal with it. But I'm not really trying super hard to hit a home run, so to speak. I'll take a single and a double.
Yeah, and then maybe over time, a couple of years
Yeah,
down the road, as it grows and and you're able to do scale it,
yeah,
it'll eventually turn into a nice little home
and
run.
yeah, and that's usually how things. I mean, that's usually how things work out. Is if you have a good solution and people are happy and talking about it, then you will need that external support. And it's not something that, well, this is also one of the things I learned in Coderific. It's not something that you can force. If it happens, it will happen. It will be clearly obvious that you need external support.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you. Is that like, you started two businesses so far, and in the beginning of the process, like, how did you deal with, like, in the beginning phases where you may have seen not as many people as you expected to, or you just had really high expectations and the reality didn't meet them? How did you really overcome that part?
Yeah, so thank God I'm beyond that stage. But in Calorific, it was extremely emotionally difficult, where you basically do everything in your power. You reach to 1,000 people. You try to make a story for the local press, uh, and then you only see like five customers, right? Five users or customers, whatever you call them, you have no idea if this is a success or a failure. And naturally, as you said, you're optimistic because you're finding a business, and you look at that, it'll be like, oh, it's a failure. um, and that takes its emotional toll. So you end up working harder and harder and harder. And if you have investors or money or whatever, you end up spending money, even so sometimes it doesn't make sense, um, because you see it as a failure. You see the 5 customers that you got in the first month as something that is not impressive, especially like over the internet. um, you'll see people, oh, like, $1 million in 1 year, or $2 million in 2 years, or whatever it is, and that makes you extremely disappointed at yourself.
Very
um,
common. Very
yeah,
common.
but the reality is, now that I've seen it once, the reality is basically you set whatever goals that make sense for you. And it's not about where you start. It's more about if you're growing consistently or not. And if you're doing a good job and you're solving a problem, then things is gonna they're gonna grow naturally. And that's what happened with Scuderific, is that basically we had one school, and the school liked us, and they told another school, and they told another school, and things just grew naturally. And basically, a lot of the money that we spent earlier in advertising was a complete waste. And time and promising something and actually doing it was a lot more valuable than all these things in the beginning. So
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely like that. I think a lot of people, when they look at the analytics, they let's just take for example like a website, and you look at the analytics of it, and you only look for the first week. It can be really discouraging to you. But if you zoom out, look at the months, look at the years, look at the sorted by weeks for the year, and then you just see like the bigger picture, like how far that you've really grown. And I think that's a big pitfall that people really fall into now, is that they focus too much on the present, or the like not a big piece of history.
yeah, and like I said, time is the most powerful weapon. um, because it's almost like compound interest. If you have 100 customers and 2 of them will talk to other people about your business, then that's 102, and then after that it's 105, and then so it compounds. And you just have to be patient, and you have to set like realistic expectation, and essentially tune out a lot of the hype that you see on like Twitter and LinkedIn and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I can definitely say it's the worst feeling like to you when you see like, oh, you've been doing something for like 3 months, and then someone comes up in here and they are doing the same venture as you, but they randomly found like $1 million success like in
Yeah.
a couple weeks. It's the
I,
worst
li-
feeling, but it's a
yeah.
big
Well, you don't want to believe everything you see too. Like, um, I mean, we ended up. That's one of the good things about the MBA, is that we ended up doing like business cases, and one time we did for things that actually failed. And a lot of these things had lots of attention, and there was an article written about it in the New York Times, and it must have been, and they raised a lot of money, and it must have been like in the first months. If you're just watching, it could have been like the greatest venture ever, and like a great home run. And then like 2 years later, it completely failed, and no one even knows about it. And then you look at something like Grakelist, right? So Grakelist is like a $5 billion business per year. um, but it's like, it's nothing. It's just something that we're used to. It gets no attention. It gets no New York Times articles. It gets no local press. It just does its job well, and people go to it every day. And that's really what it's all about. And I mean, I don't. For the people who are listening here, if you like follow a lot of these personalities on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, just balance it out by following like people who are actually building real stuff in real time, the building in public, because you can see like the actual numbers of what's a realistic numbers looks like.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. But it looks like we are nearing the end of this time of this podcast time wise. Jonathan, you have a amazing story. I love your story. I love that you value self teaching yourself in these times. And you're really like I feel like you're really like overcoming the odds because you came here as an immigrant, you went through schooling, got a nice job, got another degree, and you're starting businesses on your own and fixing problems for other people, which I love, and I think that is a very very good um, lesson for people to learn is that like honestly knowledge is power because it gives you the tools that you need to solve problems for other people's lives. Where can our listeners find you on social media? Where can they find Joyful Gifts? Where can they find you in general?
Yeah, so I'll probably be most active at Twitter, and you can find me there at Jonathan underscore Adley another underscore. And I build in public. So every month, I basically post the numbers of I get with Joyful Gifts. So it's out there, and if someone wants specific information and like messages me, I most of the time I give it to them. Um, Especially if been following for a while and like engaging. Joyful Gifts is it's very easy. It's joyful dot gifts. There's no www. There's no .com. You just type joyful dot gifts on your browser, and you're there. And like I said, if you if you don't like shopping, then it makes a lot of sense to automate the process for you.
I love that. I love that. Everything that Jonathan mentioned will be in the description of this podcast. Jonathan, I thank you once again for coming on to my podcast. I really enjoyed hearing about your history and what you've done and kind of like the lessons that you learned throughout going through life.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yep, no problem. All right, and that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this show of The More You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It'll certainly help me out in the algorithm, and be sure to subscribe or follow to The More You Know on your favorite podcasting platform like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. And lastly, if you would like to contribute to The More You Know, you can head over to anchor.fm forward slash The More You Know Pod and contribute any monetary value to help the quality of the show and in the future bring on some more interesting guests. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate all of my listeners, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.